The last evening of the world. The date was April 14th, 1912. The Atlantic Ocean was not just calm, it was eerily flat, resembling a vast sheet of black polished glass. Above, the sky was a diamond mine of stars, but there was no moon to cast a warning glow upon the water. Inside the first-class dining saloon of the R.M.S. Titanic, the air smelled of expensive cigars, French perfume, and roast duckling. The orchestra played Puccini. Men in tuxedos raised crystal glasses to toast the greatest engineering marvel of the 20th century. They were sitting inside a steel beast that weighed 46,000 tons, yet it glided through the water with such grace that the champagne in their glasses barely rippled. Nobody knew that beneath their feet the ship was racing at 22 knots toward a mathematical impossibility. In less than 4 hours, the band would stop playing. In less than 6 hours, this floating palace would vanish, taking the Edwardian era's innocence down with it. This is not just a story about a ship. It is a story about human arrogance, blind faith in technology, and the cruel indifference of nature. The story began long before the ship hit the water. It started at a dinner party in London in 1907. J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, and Lord Peary, the chairman of the Harland and Wolff shipyards, wanted to crush their rival, Cunard Line. Cunard had speed, they had the Lusitania and the Mauretania. Ismay and Peary decided they would not compete on speed, they would compete on size and luxury. They conceived a trio of giants, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. The Titanic was constructed in Belfast, Ireland. It was a project of pharaonic scale. 3,000 men worked for 2 years just to build the hull. It was dangerous work. 1 death for every 100,000 pounds spent was the grim rule of thumb in shipyards. By the time Titanic was finished, 8 workers had died building her. But the result was spectacular. She was 882 feet long, 4 city blocks. She was 11 stories high. The press called her the Unsinkable ship. This wasn't just marketing hype, it was a belief rooted in science. The ship's hull was divided into 16 watertight compartments. The lead architect, Thomas Andrews, had calculated that the ship could stay afloat with any 2 compartments flooded, or even the first 4. God himself could not sink this ship, a deckhand reportedly told a boarding passenger. It was a statement that would haunt history. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic prepared to leave Southampton, England for her maiden voyage to New York. The atmosphere was electric. But as the massive liner's engines roared to life, displacement of water was so violent that it snapped the mooring cables of a smaller nearby ship, the SS City of New York. The smaller ship swung out, its stern coming within 4 feet of colliding with the Titanic. Tugboats scrambled, ropes were thrown, and disaster was averted by mere inches. To the superstitious sailors on board, this was a dark omen. A maiden voyage that begins with a near collision is cursed. But the passengers on the promenade deck cheered, oblivious to the warning. As the Titanic headed out to the open sea, stopping briefly in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, she carried a microcosm of society. The first class, the wealthiest people on the planet, were on board. John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man in America, was returning from his honeymoon. Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining magnate, was there with his mistress. Isidor Straus, owner of Macy's department store, traveled with his wife, Ida. A first-class parlor suite ticket cost roughly $4,350, equivalent to over $100,000 today. The steerage, third class. Far below the waterline were the immigrants. Irish, Swedish, Armenian, and Italian families who had scraped together every penny for a one-way ticket to the land of opportunity. They were locked behind gates, separated from the luxury above, dreaming of a new life in America. Sunday, April 14, began as a crisp, beautiful day. Captain Edward J. Smith, a white-bearded patriarch of the sea, was planning to retire after this voyage. This was his victory lap. He was under pressure, specifically from Bruce Ismay, who was also on board. Ismay allegedly wanted to beat the arrival time record. He wanted headlines. So, despite the known risks of the North Atlantic, the Titanic maintained high speed. Throughout the day, the wireless room, manned by young operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, received chatter from other ships. 9 a.m., the Coronia reports ice. 1:42 p.m., the Baltic reports large quantities of field ice. 7:30 p.m., the Californian reports 3 large bergs. The warnings were received, but not all reached the bridge. The wireless operators were not actually Titanic officers. They worked for the Marconi Company. Their priority was sending telegrams for wealthy passengers, stock tips to Wall Street, greetings to family members. The pile of messages was high, and the equipment had broken down the day before, putting them behind schedule. At 11 p.m., the Californian, a ship that had stopped for the night because of the ice field, radioed the Titanic. "Say, old man, we are stopped and surrounded by ice." Jack Phillips, exhausted and deafened by the static in his headset, snapped back, "Shut up! Shut up! I am busy. I am working Cape Race." The operator of the Californian, rebuffed, turned off his radio and went to bed. The Titanic was now deaf to the world, racing blind into an ice field at 22.5 knots. Sunday, April 14, began as a crisp, beautiful day. Captain Edward J. Smith, a white-bearded patriarch of the sea, was planning to retire after this voyage. This was his victory lap. He was under pressure, specifically from Bruce Ismay, who was also on board. Ismay allegedly wanted to beat the arrival time record. He wanted headlines. So, despite the known risks of the North Atlantic, the Titanic maintained high speed. Throughout the day, the wireless room, manned by young operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, received chatter from other ships. 9 a.m., the Coronia reports ice. 1:42 p.m., the Baltic reports large quantities of field ice. 7:30 p.m., the Californian reports 3 large bergs. The warnings were received, but not all reached the bridge. The wireless operators were not actually Titanic officers. They worked for the Marconi Company. Their priority was sending telegrams for wealthy passengers, stock tips to Wall Street, greetings to family members. The pile of messages was high, and the equipment had broken down the day before, putting them behind schedule. At 11 p.m., the Californian, a ship that had stopped for the night because of the ice field, radioed the Titanic. "Say, old man, we are stopped and surrounded by ice." Jack Phillips, exhausted and deafened by the static in his headset, snapped back, "Shut up! Shut up! I am busy. I am working Cape Race." The operator of the Californian, rebuffed, turned off his radio and went to bed. The Titanic was now deaf to the world, racing blind into an ice field at 22.5 knots. High up in the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were peering into the darkness. They had a problem. The binoculars were missing. They had been locked in a cabinet in Southampton, and the officer with the key had been transferred off the ship at the last minute. They were using only their eyes. The ocean was too calm. Without waves breaking against the base of an iceberg, there was no white foam to spot. An iceberg would look just like a black shadow against a black sky. At 11:39 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw something, a void in the stars, a black mass that was darker than the ocean. It was directly ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times. Clang, clang, clang. He grabbed the telephone, connecting him to the bridge. "What did you see?" the voice on the other end asked. Fleet screamed the words that would echo for a century. "Iceberg, right ahead!" On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch had seconds to react. He shouted, "Hard a starboard," and ordered the engines to full reverse. The massive ship began to turn, slowly, agonizingly slowly. The bow swung to the left. It seemed they might clear it. The lookouts braced themselves. The wall of ice glided past the starboard side. For a split second, silence. Then, a vibration. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't a thud. It was a grinding noise, like a giant knife tearing through a tin can. It lasted only 10 seconds. Chunks of ice fell onto the deck. Some passengers, delighted by the novelty, started playing soccer with the ice chunks. Down in the boiler rooms, the reality was terrifying. The iceberg hadn't just grazed the ship, it had buckled the steel plates below the waterline, popping rivets like buttons off a shirt. Thomas Andrews, the architect, was summoned to the bridge. He looked at the blueprints. He looked at the water rising in the mailroom. He did the math in his head. 5 compartments were flooding. The ship could survive 4, not 5. Andrews looked at Captain Smith, his face pale. "She's made of iron, sir. I assure you she can sink." "How long?" Smith asked. "An hour and a half, possibly 2. There were 2,224 people on board. The lifeboats could only carry 1,178. The nightmare had begun. At 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes after the collision, a strange sensation washed over the ship. It wasn't a noise, it was the absence of one. For 4 days, the massive reciprocating engines had created a rhythmic, comforting heartbeat that vibrated through the floorboards. Suddenly, that heartbeat stopped. The silence was deafening. It woke more people than the crash had. In the first-class suites, passengers rang bells for stewards. "Why have we stopped? Is there engine trouble?" The stewards, equally confused but trained to maintain order, smiled politely. "Nothing to worry about, sir. Just a precaution. Please go back to sleep." But down in the mailroom, the facade was already crumbling. The postal clerks were not sleeping. They were waiting. Water was already swirling around their knees, and they were frantically trying to drag sacks of registered mail up the stairs. It was a futile effort. The Atlantic Ocean was pouring in at a rate of 7 tons per second. On the bridge, Captain Smith seemed to have entered a state of shock. The man who had commanded ships for 40 years was staring at a situation for which there was no manual. He ordered the lifeboats to be uncovered. He ordered the passengers to be mustered on deck with lifebelts. But he gave the orders quietly. He knew that if he yelled, if he showed fear, 2,000 people would panic, and a riot would kill them faster than the water. At 12:15 a.m., Captain Smith walked into the wireless room. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were joking about the earlier equipment failure. Smith looked at them, his face grave. "Send the call for assistance," he said. "Which call, sir?" Phillips asked. "The regulation distress call, CQD." Phillips began tapping the key. CQD, 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 MGY, Titanic's call sign. Later, Bride jokingly suggested, "Send the new signal, Jack. Send SOS. It may be your only chance to use it." Phillips laughed and switched to the new international standard. ... dash, 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 ... The signal blasted out across the freezing ether. 300 miles away, the Carpathia heard the call. Her captain, Arthur Rostron, was a pious, disciplined man. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for confirmation. He immediately ordered his ship to turn around. "Full speed ahead," he commanded. "Divert all steam to the engines. Cut off the heat to the cabins if you have to." The Carpathia began to shudder as she pushed past her top speed, racing to save a dying giant. But she was 4 hours away. The Californian was only 10 miles away. Its officers saw the Titanic's lights. They even saw rockets firing into the sky later. But their radio was off. They thought the big ship was having a party. They watched the lights drift, unaware they were watching a graveyard in the making. On the deck boat, the air was freezing, around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius. The steam venting from the funnels was roaring so loudly that officers had to use hand signals to communicate. The evacuation began at 12:45 a.m., and it was a disaster of mismanagement. Most passengers simply didn't believe the ship was sinking. It looked solid, it felt warm, the deck was still mostly level. Why trade the comfort of the unsinkable Titanic for a tiny, fragile wooden boat dropping 60 feet into pitch-black, freezing water? "I'll take my chances here," said many men, lighting cigarettes. Because of this disbelief, the first lifeboats left criminally empty. Lifeboat number 7 was the first to lower. It had a capacity of 65 people. It left with only 28. Lifeboat number 1 rode away with only 12 people. To make matters worse, there was a fatal confusion of orders between the 2 senior officers manning the davits. On the port side, Second Officer Lightoller interpreted the captain's order, "Women and children first," as "women and children only." He refused to let men into the boats even if there were empty seats. He lowered boats half empty rather than let a man step inside. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch interpreted the order as "women and children first, then men if there is room." He saved many more lives, allowing men to board once the women were seated. By 12:15 a.m., the tilt of the deck became noticeable. The playful atmosphere vanished. The soccer games with ice chunks stopped. The realization hit the crowd like a sledgehammer. The ship is actually going down. Panic began to bubble up from the steerage decks. The third-class passengers had been largely ignored. Many were trapped behind locked gates, complying with American immigration laws that required classes to be separated to prevent the spread of disease. Now, those gates were death sentences. They banged on the metal barriers, screaming in languages the stewards didn't understand. Some smashed the gates down, others climbed emergency ladders, emerging onto the boat deck, only to find most of the lifeboats already gone. Amid the chaos, there were moments of heartbreaking dignity. Isidore and Ida Strauss, the elderly owners of Macy's, were standing near lifeboat number 8. Officer Gracie tried to force Ida into the boat. She stepped in, but when she saw Isidore hanging back, she climbed back out. "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go," she told her husband. They sat down on a pair of deck chairs, holding hands, waiting for the end together. Benjamin Guggenheim, the millionaire playboy, realized the situation. He went back to his room, took off his lifebelt and sweater, and put on his finest evening wear, white tail and tails. He returned to the deck and announced, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." And then there was the band. Wallace Hartley and his 7 musicians assembled on the deck. It wasn't their job to die. They were employees of a music agency, not the ship's crew. They could have tried to save themselves. Instead, they set up their instruments. "Play something lively," Hartley said. They played ragtime. They played waltzes. As the deck slanted and people screamed and ran past them, the band played on. It was a surreal soundtrack to the apocalypse. They provided the only sense of order in a world gone mad. By 1:45 a.m., the bow of the Titanic was deep underwater. The water was creeping up the promenade deck. The lights of the ship still burned bright, a testament to the engineers who kept the generators running deep in the bowels of the ship, knowing they would never get out. The panic was now absolute. Officer Lightoller forced to brandish his revolver to keep a mob of men from rushing the last boat. "Get back!" he screamed, waving the Webley pistol. "I'll shoot the first one who tries it." The men backed down. The discipline of the era held barely. One of the last collapsible boats, Collapsible C, was being fitted into the davits. Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, the man who had dreamed up this ship, was standing nearby. He looked around. There were no women or children in the immediate vicinity. In a moment of weakness that would destroy his reputation forever, Ismay jumped into the empty seat. As the boat lowered, he turned his back to the ship, unable to watch his creation die. At 2:05 a.m., the last collapsible boat, Collapsible D, was lowered. There were still 1,500 people left on board. The lifeboats were gone. The band changed the tune. The lively ragtime faded. In the freezing air, the haunting notes of a hymn drifted over the water. Some say it was Nearer, My God, to Thee. Others say it was Autumn. Whatever the song, it was a funeral march. The ship groaned. A deep terrestrial rumble rose from inside as heavy machinery broke loose and crashed through the bulkheads. The bow plunged deeper. The stern began to rise high into the air. The end was here.
The time was 2:15 a.m. The Titanic had reached a terrifying angle. The stern of the ship was now towering some 200 feet above the surface, silhouetted against the night sky. The three immense 50-ton propellers were exposed to the stars. On the bridge, the lights flickered, dimmed, and then, in one final dramatic gesture, went out. The immense crowd still on board let out a collective, desperate wail that survivors in the lifeboats half a mile away would never forget. A second later, the lights came back on. The engineers, working in a hellish, flooding engine room, had achieved a miracle. It was a brief reprieve, lasting perhaps a minute, but it offered a final, horrifying panorama of the chaos on the decks. People clung to the railings, sliding across the deck as if it were an icy ramp. Then the lights died for good. The ship was plunged into absolute darkness, illuminated only by the distant, cold light of the stars. The structural stress on the middle of the ship became too great. Thomas Andrews' calculations of the ship's strength failed to account for this extreme angle. With a sound described as a massive moan followed by 100 gunshots, the bursting of bulkheads and rivets, the Titanic began to break apart. Eyewitnesses in the lifeboats described seeing the midsection of the ship fracture. The tremendous weight of the bow, already full of water, pulled downward, while the buoyancy of the stern resisted. The ship broke cleanly between the third and fourth funnels, creating a massive, jagged tear. The bow section plunged immediately, dragging the forward part of the broken hull with it. The rear section, the stern, now floated vertically like a gigantic coffin rising from the sea. It hung suspended for a moment, an 11-story-high tower defying gravity. Then it began its final, rapid descent. Hundreds of people were still clinging to the stern railings. As the ship dropped, gravity took hold. Screams were instantly replaced by the terrifying roar of water and tearing metal. Debris, chairs, tables, people was thrown into the sea. The stern section disappeared beneath the waves at 2:20 a.m. The time elapsed since the iceberg strike was just 2 hours and 40 minutes. The Titanic was gone. Now only a few pieces of flotsam and a massive cloud of steam marked the spot where the greatest ship in the world had been. The steam subsided. Then the noise began. The lifeboats, bobbing half a mile away, were engulfed by a sound no human should ever hear. The cries of over 1,000 people thrashing in the 28 Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius water. This was the true horror of the disaster. The North Atlantic water in April is instantly deadly. Exposure to water below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius, can cause rapid hypothermia, a sudden drop in body temperature. More immediate, however, is cold shock response. The sudden immersion causes involuntary gasping, hyperventilation, and a massive spike in heart rate and blood pressure, often leading to immediate cardiac arrest or drowning. Most people did not die of drowning, they died of the cold. The mass of humanity was screaming, praying, and pleading for help. It was a symphony of agony. In the lifeboats, the survivors, many of them women and children, but also many healthy, strong men who were saved early, listened to the cries. Quartermaster Robert Hitchens, in charge of lifeboat number 6, was urged to turn back. He refused. "It's no use," he insisted. "There's only room for us. We'll only be swamped." The fear of being overwhelmed by hundreds of desperate, freezing people paralyzed the lifeboats. Only one lifeboat, number 4, returned to the scene, and it was primarily due to the insistence of one woman, Madeline Astor. Even then, they only managed to pull out 6 people, 2 of whom later died. Officer Lightoller, who had been swept into the water when the ship broke, was saved only by a freak accident. He was sucked down by a ventilator shaft, then blasted back up by an explosion from one of the boilers, landing him on the upturned collapsible B. 30 men clung precariously to the slick bottom of this flipped boat all night. For 20 minutes, the screams continued. Then they began to dwindle. One by one, the voices went silent as the cold claimed their victims. By 3 a.m., the ocean was eerily quiet again. The water was no longer alive with struggling figures. It was filled with the dead. At 3:30 a.m., a small flare was spotted on the horizon. The Carpathia was finally approaching. Captain Rostron arrived at the scene with military precision. He turned off his engines to maintain silence and began navigating a treacherous field of icebergs, the same field that had killed the Titanic, to find the 20 scattered lifeboats. The first lifeboat was found at 4:10 a.m. It was cold, crowded, and silent. As the survivors were hauled aboard, the magnitude of the disaster was revealed. Women searching for their husbands, children calling for their fathers, the wealthy and the poor standing shoulder to shoulder, draped in blankets, united by the horror they had witnessed. When J. Bruce Ismay was brought aboard the Carpathia, he looked like a ghost. He was immediately placed in the ship's sickbay and given sedatives. He did not speak for days. His survival became one of the biggest controversies of the disaster. By 8:30 a.m., the last of the lifeboats was recovered. They had saved 705 people. 1,503 people had perished. As the Carpathia turned east, away from the scene, the survivors looked back. There was nothing left to see but a vast, empty ocean, still dotted with ice. The greatest ship ever built had dissolved into myth.
The Carpathia arrived in New York City on the evening of April 18, 1912, in a torrential downpour. The news had traveled quickly, transmitted by the Marconi wireless. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the piers, waiting for a miracle that would not come. The arrival was agonizingly slow. The Carpathia first dropped off the Titanic's lifeboats, empty, battered, and bearing the White Star logo, at Pier 59. This sight alone shattered the hope of the waiting crowd. When the survivors disembarked at Pier 54, the sheer scale of the tragedy was finally understood. There were no joyous reunions for the vast majority. Instead, there were widows, orphans, and grieving relatives. The shock of the nation was profound. The era of blind faith in technology, the idea that science could conquer nature, was over. The unsinkable had sunk. The world realized that human ingenuity, no matter how grand, was ultimately subject to the cruel, cold laws of the physical world. The American and British governments immediately launched inquiries. They didn't want to know how the ship sank. They already knew that. They wanted to know why 1,500 people had died unnecessarily. The sinking of the R.M.S. Titanic was not treated as an accident, it was treated as a crime against the modern world. Two major investigations, one in New York by the United States Senate and one in London by the British Board of Trade, began almost immediately. The American inquiry, led by Senator William Alden Smith, was the more sensational of the two. It was swift, theatrical, and often aimed at shaming the wealthy and the powerful who had survived. Witnesses were cross-examined relentlessly. Captain Smith's responsibility. The inquiry concluded that Captain Smith had been reckless, pushing the ship to a dangerously high speed, over 22 knots, through a known ice field, prioritizing the schedule over safety. The Californian. The most damning testimony centered on the nearby SS Californian. Captain Stanley Lord admitted his ship was halted in the ice field and had seen rockets fired by the Titanic, but failed to wake his radio operator. Senator Smith declared that the Californian had been within sight of the disaster and had inexcusably failed to render assistance. J. Bruce Ismay's fate. White Star Line chairman J. Bruce Ismay was interrogated for hours. His decision to save himself while hundreds of women and children perished earned him the permanent title of the Coward of the Titanic. Although no criminal charges were brought, his reputation was destroyed. He became a recluse until his death. The British inquiry, led by Lord Mersey, was more technical, focusing on the flaws in the construction and maritime regulations. They confirmed the American findings and issued a scathing report on the standards of the era. The two inquiries resulted in revolutionary changes to maritime safety that affect every ship sailing today. The death of the Titanic led directly to the birth of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS. Key changes enacted immediately included lifeboats for all. The archaic rule that based lifeboat capacity on a ship's tonnage rather than the number of people on board was abolished. From then on, all ships had to carry enough lifeboats for every person on board. 24-hour radio watch. All passenger ships were required to maintain a 24-hour wireless watch and have secondary power sources for the radio, ensuring distress calls were never missed again. The International Ice Patrol, IIP. The U.S. government created and funded the IIP, a permanent service whose purpose is to monitor iceberg migration in the North Atlantic. Every ship sailing this route now receives daily, precise ice warnings. Muster drills. Mandatory and frequent lifeboat drills were instituted for both crew and passengers. The loss of the Titanic created the foundation of modern maritime safety. The disaster also immortalized true heroes and villains. Thomas Andrews. The architect was last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting, having done everything he could to save others. He did not attempt to find a lifebelt. He was the only person who truly knew the ship's fate from the start. Captain Edward J. Smith. He regained his composure in the final moments, reportedly telling his crew, "Well, boys, you've done your duty and done it well. I ask no more of you. I release you. You know the rule of the sea. It's every man for himself now, and God bless you." He was last seen on the bridge as the water rose, accepting his fate with his ship. The band. All 8 musicians, including band leader Wallace Hartley, died. They were posthumously recognized for their extraordinary courage. Hartley's body was recovered, and his violin, a gift from his fiancée, was found strapped to his chest. The wreckage of the Titanic lay lost in the deep ocean for 73 years. Hundreds of attempts were made to find it, but the vastness of the Atlantic and the depth, over 12,000 feet, made it impossible. In 1985, a joint French-American expedition led by the renowned American oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard finally located the wreck. Ballard had pioneered the use of a deep-sea submersible camera system called Argo. The discovery was astonishing. The location. The wreck lay 370 miles southeast of the coast of Newfoundland, 12,500 feet, 3,800 meters below the surface. The separation. Ballard confirmed the testimony of the few survivors who claimed the ship broke in two. The bow section and the stern section lay 1,970 feet apart, facing opposite directions. The missing midsection was a gigantic field of debris. The condition. The bow was instantly recognizable and mostly intact, having plunged like a torpedo. The stern, however, was a mangled, chaotic mess. Its structure had been utterly annihilated by the air compression and implosion as it descended. Dr. Ballard and subsequent expeditions treated the wreck site not as a salvage opportunity, but as a sacred grave site. The metal is now covered in rusticles, massive iron-consuming bacteria formations, and it is estimated that the wreck will completely decompose by 2030 or 2040. Epilogue: The Eternal Lesson. The Titanic was not just a ship, it was a symbol of an age when humanity believed it was master of the world. Its sinking exposed the fragile line between innovation and hubris, between the first-class luxury and the third-class vulnerability, and between life and the cold, unyielding power of nature. Today, every ship on the sea, every mandatory radio check, and every lifeboat drill is a silent tribute to the 1,503 souls lost on that cold, starless night in 1912. The grand ship that was supposed to be the jewel of the modern age became instead a timeless warning.